Good afternoon and welcome to one of Broadcasting Scotland's review of 2024. My name is Brian Liddy and I'm joined today in the studio, live in the studio, by Linda Fabiani, a previous SNP
Hi.
MSP. Thank you for joining us, Linda.
Pleasure.
And another excellent guest in the form of Martin Docherty-Hughes, the former defence spokesperson for the SNP in Westminster. Welcome, Martin. Thank you for giving us some of your time at this really kind of time of year when everybody's got pressure on their timetables. How are you?
Not too bad. Yourselves?
All together, yeah. Thank you. So this full Scottish roundup of 2024 is dedicated mostly to the UK economy, but I'm sure we'll end up talking about the Scottish economy in connection to that. So we've got the downs and downs of the UK economy this year. We were just trying to remember before we came on air, and we think that we started 2024 with the UK economy in recession, and that was under a Tory government. The Guardian 3 days ago reported that UK factory orders have collapsed to a 4-year low. The CBI says inflation rises to 2.6% as it happened. In response, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has said that he has more to do on the economy, so growth is felt in the pockets of working people. Linda, do you think that Keir Starmer is doing enough to banish the myth that Labour governments are historically no use at managing the economy?
Well, not so far, no. I mean, I'm more concerned about what he's not doing to help people get through it, I have to say. But the figures on the economy are pretty bad. I mean, I was reading them a couple of days ago, after the OECD cut the growth forecast for the UK economy down to less than 1%. When you look at what's happening across the Eurozone, we're not doing as well as the EU countries in terms of GDP. So things aren't great at all. And, all the reports that we're hearing, about the economy struggling, zero expectation about it actually getting any better. So there's probably not been time yet for Starmer to be able to refute the claims that Labour are always rubbish on the economy. I'm more concerned about the other things that he seems to be rubbish on, but no doubt we'll get to these discussions as well.
We will be getting to them, I'm sure. Martin, I've got providing further evidence of the gloom descending on the economy in recent months. The CBI's latest industrial trends survey shows that manufacturers suffered the worst slump in orders since November 2020. And I'm just wondering if you could maybe call on your experience in Westminster as an MP. What advice would you give Starmer?
Roll back on Brexit.
Yeah.
I think it's the elephant in the room, and there is an absolute lack of wanting to tackle the economic crisis that has unfolded because of Brexit. The lurch to the right. And Linda alludes to the fact that this Labour government is taking it out on those most in need of support. And that's not just those who are finding it difficult as individuals and as families, but it's also small businesses and medium-sized businesses, especially with the national insurance increases being passed on to them. They won't be able to employ people or reduce the amount of people they may employ. But the bigger picture here, it's Brexit, and they have unleashed an economic storm which will devalue investment in the wider UK, not only in Scotland but across the whole of the UK. I think the FT the other day was talking about a 0.1% shrinkage again in its latest figures, but that goes prior, as Linda alluded to, prior to the budget in October from Rachel Reeves, because everything here is founded in the UK leaving the European Union and the economic catastrophe that we all knew that would happen once that takes root. And we're now seeing the fruit of the far right's labours here in the UK.
And Martin's right, isn't it? I mean, Brexit happened in 2016. We're doing a review of 2024, but he's right, isn't it? I mean, Brexit is
He's
ongoing.
absolutely right. I mean, you can see that all the time. I mean, I mentioned the GDP figures earlier, and the EU are at 4.6% higher than pre-pandemic, and the UK is only at 3%. So, yeah, there it is. Starkly, the EU is doing better than the UK, but that's only part of the picture. In every other element as well, the UK is suffering through Brexit, and I, for one, am devastated at the Starmer turnaround on the EU from where he was back in 2016 to where he gradually got to through his own desperation to get elected. A complete turnaround on it, and as far as I can see, not even willing to be talking sensibly with the EU about mitigations that may take place, different things that can be tweaked. He's just pandering to the populist ideas that he thinks get you elected. And, I keep coming back to the same theme all the time, but, where are the politicians in Westminster who do things because it's the right thing to do, rather than just do anything to get and stay elected? It's sad, sad days, it really is.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And Martin, if we're talking about the UK economy, then a big factor in that is going to have to be Rachel Reeves' budget recently. I don't know, is she going to be proud of it when she decided to raise employers' national insurance contributions, say, for example, and then how that impacts the Scottish budget? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into the personalities of it, but what I would say is that it is what it is, and in terms of the budget has happened, but the UK government had political choices to make, and those political choices they made came down on the side of big business, international corporations, and not on the side of the citizen. And that really is for Scots to really think about their own political choices when they go to the ballot box. I'm afraid that the Labour have got a huge majority, and the decision was taken freely and democratically to put them into administration in Westminster. And we are, what can I say? We are harvesting the fruits of that decision, and that is continuing a right-wing conservative agenda.
Thanks, Martin. And Shona Robeson said that 60% of Scots will be better off because they live in Scotland. And when she announced the draft budget, what did you think of the SNP's budget, and again maybe in relation to Rachel Reeves?
I thought the SNP's budget was excellent. I have to say I was surprised how positive it was, because when you look at the way we've been hammered over the last few years by Westminster, I was worried that there was not a lot else that could be pulled out, but I think it was a very, very good budget. I think some of the things that she has been able to maintain and plan to introduce have been excellent, and they're all about the alleviation of poverty, which is what we should be about. So I thought it was excellent. I do have concerns. I have concerns that things will get even worse in terms of settlements from Westminster. I have concerns that there are so many things that are in the purview of Westminster. Employment, for example, all these things that we tried in the Smith Commission to have transferred to Scotland and to Holyrood, that Labour sided with the Tories on even then. So I do have concerns that, was it George Fawkes that said we were deliberately doing things better in Scotland? So I'm worried that there will be a bit of a backlash on it, because Starmer and co will be worried about Scotland starting to do things better, and will look for ways to stymie that. And unfortunately, Anna Sarwar and his team sitting in Holyrood seem to also have forgotten what the Labour Party used to be about and just seem to want to be in power and staying in power. So it was an excellent budget from Shona Robson, but I'm worried that external forces will make it harder and harder to achieve.
Thank you, Linda. And the next item on the running order is inflation and interest rates. Rishi Sunak, when he was Prime Minister of a Tory government, took a lot of credit for bringing inflation down, even though everybody said it would be coming down anyway on its own without the Tory government having to do anything. Now we've got UK inflation has risen to its highest level in 8 months, adding to pressure on the Bank of England to keep interest rates unchanged and despite a slowdown in the British economy. The Consumer Price Index rose by 2.6% from 2.3% in October, driven by the rising cost of petrol, groceries and an increase in tobacco duty in the budget. I'm just wondering, whose turn is it this time? It's Martin. Again, it's the same question, but how do you think Keir Starmer's doing on the inflation interest rate front?
Well, clearly inflation is a persistent issue in the UK, and that's a political choice. I mean, just slightly going back to Linda's points on the Scottish Government's position, those are political choices. You make political choices based on your political belief system. And the SNP, under John Swinney's leadership, is expressing that belief system, I believe, within limitations as a social democratic party. The Labour Party has, debunked or kind of tried to unburden itself with its social democratic past and is making choices which are, I think, fundamental for social democrats. The issue of inflation for them is their consistent disinvestment in not just individuals, but in people. And that means communities, in youth work. It means not only investment in the NHS, but investment for small and medium-sized businesses that employ people, which can be the core of a burgeoning economy and growth. And they are investing heavily in the top earners. That's not a recipe for stable inflationary processes or lowering inflation. That's a recipe for the big hitters and the conglomerates to basically get more money out of everyone else down the bottom of the chain. It's you're staying. The Bank of England's is literally an anomaly across Europe, with rates around about 4.75, I think, and that really is an issue for stagnation and lack of productivity. But that's at the core of the British state. That's always been a problem since the Second World War in relation to issues around productivity, and I don't see this Westminster government doing anything about it.
Thank you, Martin. Linda, Martin mentioned people there in his answer, and I think I'm right. I'm not an economist, but I think I'm right in saying that high interest rates are good for savers, but they're bad when it comes to families making ends meet. So I suppose that's people, isn't it?
Well, yeah. It's horrendous. I mean, as well as keeping the interest rate, I think it was at 4.75.
Yeah, I think my figures were out of date actually.
Yeah. The Bank of England also said some pretty stark words. They talked about heightened concerns over stubborn inflation. They talked about the dangers of inflation becoming entrenched, and that has a direct effect on people. And we all know why, inflation is rising and being entrenched, and we'll no doubt talk about that too. But that directly impacts people. And I can't remember the figures, but I know there are fewer savers now than previously. Fewer people are saving. Therefore, as you say, that interest rate helps savers. Fewer people are saving, so it's a small amount of people that are getting benefit out of this, and the majority of people are getting hammered, and the political choice has been that can be allowed to happen. So I think it was 2.6% inflation was in November at the last full month count.
Yeah, and there's things like the living wage in England. I think I'm right in saying that after Rachel Reeves' budget, it's going to increase from £11.44 to £12.20 an hour for people aged 20 and over, but in Scotland it's already £12.60 an hour for anyone over 18.
That'd be the real living wage, Brian. Yeah, that was something the Scottish Government brought in, the Scottish Parliament approved. Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I think why Shona Robinson said if you live in Scotland you're going to be better off.
That's in there in the mix.
And Martin mentioned the NHS. Again, I think Scottish Government's going to increase investment in the Scottish NHS.
Yep.
But it's time to move on. And so we've been talking about people, and we've been talking about cost of living, people in poverty. So it's maybe an opportunity to talk about winter fuel payments. The Labour leadership lost a conference vote earlier this year on winter fuel payments. The motion had called on ministers to reverse the cuts to winter fuel payments. That came after a union leader said the UK needed investment, not austerity Mark II, which maybe chimes with what Martin was saying about productivity. Sharon Graham, the General Secretary of Unite, accused Starmer for removing the allowance while leaving the super rich untouched. I was going to say... I was going to come later. Sorry, I'm so sorry. So, Linda, what would you like to say about people in poverty and winter fuel payments?
Oh, well, you can see why people are in poverty. You know, it's not just that he did away with the winter fuel payments, you know, reversed that manifesto commitment, amongst others. But also the fuel cap was lifted. So, you know, bills going higher as well. So that's an issue. And energy costs generally have gone up and up for us. Then there's inflation, the other elements of inflation. And, you know, while we're saying inflation is at 2.6%, within these figures, there's different rates of how things have gone up. And one of the big issues is that basic foodstuffs, the cost of basic foodstuffs has risen enormously. There was work done in that before. I don't think there's anything been done within the last couple of months. So, you've got people having to heat their homes at the coldest time of the year, having had their winter fuel allowance taken away if they're a certain age, but also for everyone, the cap. You also have inflation on things like basic foods. And there's another element, Brian, that I haven't seen much about reported, but because of the job I used to do, I still occasionally get people get in touch with me with concerns, and I try and help them if I can, direct them to the right places. And I've had a few folk lately who have found that the move away from tax credits, working tax credits, onto universal credit, which is mandatory, is actually giving them a lot less money. So there's an issue there that doesn't seem to be getting completely recognised or reported on, that people are having difficulties with too. So yes, people are in poverty. And the thing that's worse about it is that the divide is getting worse. And we now have a Labour government that is, you know, not doing anything to address that divide. In fact, under the last Labour government, it was Tony Blair's government, I think the divide started to get wider as well between the haves and the have-nots. So you have people who are doing very, very well, who are being pretty well looked after. And you have folk who are just getting stamped on constantly. And it's those who are being stamped on constantly who have got real poverty and real concerns, hence the rise in food banks, hence the rise in organisations like the one I'm involved in, having to help people in all aspects of life.
Thank you, Linda. Martin, I know you've got prior commitments and you'll be leaving us soon, but so I'd like to ask you, where Scottish Labour figures in all of this? I mean, Sarwar started out defending Rachel Reeves' decision to drop the winter fuel payment. I'm just wondering if you get any idea where he is now on the subject?
I think we need to be clear, there is only one Labour Party and its headquarters is in London, and it's certainly not anywhere in Scotland. I think the leadership of their party across the UK is certainly out of the loop in terms of the big decision making, and that's what happens when you have an overly centralised proposition. If you'll forgive me if I just go back to what Linda had been saying as well, where I completely agree. Linda and I have both worked not only in the voluntary sector, not Linda's background, especially in housing, we have seen substantial change in the way in which the economy impacts society and all of those who make up it, which we are all part of. And that again comes down to political choices. And at least from my perspective, unionism is wedded to this notion of, a failure in, right-wing conservative economic policy that Margaret Thatcher and people who were behind her really espoused. And all that Labour did after in the early 90s was kind of take on new clothing, and that's all we're seeing. Impacts what we're seeing impacting our society today. And I think it's now incumbent upon those of us critically, those of us in the SNP, those who I would hope who are on the left, to really, to paraphrase somebody, you need to have an authentic social democratic revolution. We really, and we're seeing a part of that in, the Scottish Government's budget. I mean, First Minister, if you can trust someone to bring forward a great budget like that, it's certainly John Swinney. And so we need to be very robust in rejecting the type of economic policies that come out of Westminster, and really, pin our flag to the post as social democrats and about dignity in work, dignity and access to food, and dignity for every citizen. That needs to be a clarion call, because it's getting drowned out, not just in the bigger economic debate, but all of the social media activity we're seeing recently, drawing people of, for example, on Twitter or X, what you want to call it. And we're in a real danger of losing our sound political principles. And I'm, as a member of the SNP, I hope that the party becomes far more robust in its defend of those types of principles and the type of nation and country we want to build.
Thank you, Martin. So the next item is child poverty and the two-child cap. We frequently hear First Minister John Swinney tell us that the aim of his government is to eradicate child poverty in Scotland. But he seems to be hampered by developments continually from Westminster, and has to mitigate UK government policies, which then kind of means we don't get the benefit of it. Fraser of Allender Institute said a two-child limit might cost as much as £200 million a year. But I wonder, Martin, do you remember Richard Burgon, the Labour MP for Leeds East? He was actually suspended from the Labour Party for voting against the government's plans to keep the two-child benefit cap, and said Starmer should respect the conference vote. Labour conference this year voted to remove it.
Yeah, I mean, Richard's on, I would say, the very small, tiny raft of the left, which is left in their parliamentary party, or any of their parliamentary parties across, the UK. And the two-child cap is not the only thing the Scottish government's, mitigating. Bedroom tax, a whole range of other things, discretionary housing benefit. That's a political choice. And from where I'm standing, when you talk to people now, that's a choice that most people in Scotland, I think, still believe is the right one. And by the looks of it, the way the polls are going, it is one which will be reinforced, I think, at the moment at least, by the re-election of John Swinney as First Minister. And, more power to him, at least from my perspective, I have to say, because I think, the decision needs to be grounded in a real hardcore political philosophy of what you believe is not only achievable, but how you achieve that. And that's practical things to get people out of poverty. And also, if he had the full reins of an independent government, that would be to grow the economy faster even than it is at the moment.
Thank you, Martin. Linda, I think, having been an MSP, you'll be an expert on the SNP government's policies on eradicating child poverty.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. To follow on from what Martin said, there's a lot to be discussed. I sometimes have concerns that legislation is created for the sake of creating legislation, and not always necessary. But I think this one was really important. I think it was 2019, while I was still there, we had the Child Poverty Scotland Act went through Holyrood about the eradication of child poverty. And I think that was a hugely important thing to do. And no doubt the government and does get hammered for maybe not meeting this target or that target or anything else. But what a message it sent out was that we are a government that wishes to eradicate child poverty. In fact, a parliament, because it went through. There's a lot that the Scottish Government has done. There's the mitigation elements that that Martin mentioned, like bedroom tax, discretionary housing benefit, things like that. But there's other things too. School meals, you know, the introduction of free school meals. I think currently it's up to 10-year-olds, but you know, there's measures there to increase that further. The Scottish child payment is huge. I mean, that's what, it's now £25 a week per child. That's a big help for people. There's the one that never gets mentioned much, Child Poverty Acceleration Fund, which is about funding particular projects to get right into the nitty-gritty of why this poverty is happening and to help. Best Start Foods was introduced years ago, you know, for wee ones. Free bus travel for children. And the result of all these things, when you put them all together, you never see this reported in the mainstream press or media. Drives me up the wall. The result of that is that child poverty rates in Scotland are lower than in England and Wales. Northern Ireland, for very specific reasons, is just a wee bit better than Scotland. But if you look at it, and this comes from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, everything that the Scottish Government has done, and remember that Scottish child payment was game-changing. Child poverty rates in Scotland are now at 24%. In England, they're at 31%. That's a big difference. In Wales, they're at 28%. We never see that reported. And that's one of the big issues that I have with the mainstream press and media in this country, is the negativity of it. The BBC to me are the worst because they never make comparisons. And I believe that they're a lot easier in a UK government than they are in a Scottish government. So I'd like that to be out there. And what I would say is it also proves that we do have a social democratic left-of-centre government in Scotland that's been there from 2007 that is absolutely determined to make a difference. That leads you on to, if they can do that with the strictures that Westminster have and the hammering we get from Westminster at every turn, how much better we could do if we could make all our own decisions on the big things. Maybe we would really be able to eradicate child poverty. And that's why folk like Martin and I do everything humanly possible to work towards that, because we believe it can happen.
Thanks, Linda. Martin, do you have
a... Brian, if I come in, just on back of what Linda's saying, I think it's really important to have that objective to eradicate child poverty, because people will say, well, you're never going to do that. You're never going to achieve that utopian dream. You need, in politics, to have an objective, to reach for a principle. And that principle for the Scottish National Party, I think, is summed up in the way in which the First Minister, John Swinney, is pushing forward, giving that idea, that principle position that he is, not only as an individual, but as a parliamentary party and it's the party's leader, wants us to live in a country where we fight tooth and nail to eradicate child poverty. Because in doing that, we do so much else. We improve attainment levels. We increase the ability of individuals, of people, to feel better about themselves, to lead healthier and also hopefully wealthier lives, no matter how you measure that wealth, whether it's health and happiness. That is essential to being a social democrat. And I think Linda's right about how the party, at least from our perspective as members of it, has been driving that since it came into government so many years. And John is certainly the First Minister laser focusing on that principal objective. And of course, the media won't want to talk about it, because if they do, all they say is, well, it's unachievable in the long term. What other issues are falling behind? Well, nothing's falling behind, because if you're investing in children and young people, you're investing in the long-term future and sustainability of the country.
Thank you, Martin. And all I was going to ask, if you've still got a minute to say, was that what Linda, when she highlighted the Scottish child payment, my understanding is it's really being ramped up by the Scottish Government. Every time they increase it, I'm really quite astounded. And that thing about, if you give rich people tax cuts, then that money, they'll spend it to buy paintings by Picasso, or they'll put it in a hedge fund somewhere. It doesn't do anybody but those rich people any good. If you give cash to families, they spend it, they'll go out and they'll and then that helps the economy. Is that a correct circular argument, do you think? Or?
I think as a social democrat, I need to be very clear that the circular economy is fine as long as it's grounded in the principle of dignity for all, work for all, and access to those core elements such as food. I mean, Linda was talking about being part of food bank processes across the country as a former parliamentarian, very much aware of some of the great work that they do. But we shouldn't be living in a country where people need to queue up for food in the 21st century, not just in Scotland, but anywhere on the planet. It's quite an extraordinary situation where we see ourselves, and I know this is a former parliamentarian, Linda will know it as well, that you go along to food banks, get pictures taken, this is great work. But I think the principle that the First Minister is setting out, and it's very clear that while this is great, it doesn't answer the core issues of poverty. And that's why he needs the full gambit of powers of an independent country to do that. And I wish him every success. He's the right person at the right time. And if the polls are anything to believe, he's driving the agenda forward based on solid principles of being a social democrat, and probably the most social democratic politician in all of these islands today, quite frankly.
Thank you, Martin. And I'll move on, but when we come back, if you're no longer with us, then thank you for your time so far. And just from what you said there, wasn't it Jacob Rees-Mogg that said that he thought food banks were a good thing because it showed how kind and generous British people are, and yet we've got more food banks than McDonald's branches.
I'll pass Jacob Rees-Mogg by if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's please do. Apologies if I put anybody off their tea there. So energy prices and pensioner poverty. Ofgem have announced another increase to the energy cap this week. So what has happened to Labour's election promises to bring energy bills down by £300 that instead have gone up by £470 per household? And I'm conscious that my figures might actually be out of date. The average annual energy bill is to rise to £1,738 in the UK from January. There's going to be an increase in the price cap from Ofgem. Quarterly cap would go up by £21 a year, or about £1.75 a month for a typical household's gas and electric use. And then, of course, when you apply that to pensioners, Linda, again, I'm conscious I'm talking too much.
Oh, yeah, I don't think you are at all. Yeah, I mean, we sort of covered the winter fuel allowance issue that Labour reneged on. Changed their manifesto promise, as they seem to do on a weekly basis these days. Yeah, it's just really bad for people. And, there's always been issues with elderly people who tend to be at home more than any other section of society, finding it difficult to pay their fuel bills in winter. And it's got worse, much worse. I heard Ed Miliband talking on the radio last week, Brian, and he was talking the biggest pile of nonsense. I couldn't understand what he was talking about their energy and fuel plans and costs. The interviewer couldn't understand what he was talking about, and I have to say I suspect Ed Miliband didn't know what he was talking about either. But it struck me that he, in the last Labour government, was one of the architects of where we're at today, with the work he did with the fuel companies and opening it up to competition and everything else. So I don't have much hope for the future that a Labour government are either going to meet their renewable energy targets or indeed bring fuel costs down. And again, just to go back to a previous discussion where I talked about my frustration that the mainstream press and media in Scotland don't reflect reality as far as Scotland's concerned. There's been another issue for people in England reported this week, which is horrendous, which is massive hikes in their water bills through the private water companies. I think over the next 3 years, their water bill is going to rise by 37% or something. That's huge, and I think that's just an average. It could be even over 50% in some cases. Now, that was reported on the BBC, which is supposed to be a public service broadcaster, it was reported by newspapers that supposedly cover Scotland. And none of them happened to mention that we don't have that issue in Scotland because Scottish Water is a publicly owned company. So, yet again, the real picture is never taken. But for people south of the border from Scotland that are facing the fuel cap being lifted, that are facing higher water bills, it's a horrendous time that's going on. And for the elderly, who are reliant on a state pension, it's difficult. Hugely difficult for those who are reliant on a state pension and a wee tiny bit of private pension that stops them getting the winter fuel allowance, that stops them being passported to many other benefits. So pensioner poverty is absolutely back in the agenda under a Labour government in the UK.
Yeah, I lived in England for many years, and I can confirm that when I was there, I had a water meter in the house, and just you got your electric bill, your gas bill, your council tax, and your water company payments. Whereas here, it's included, rolled into my council tax. Staying with pensioners, you mentioned the state pension that they've. I think Rachel Reeves has said she's going to keep the triple lock, but the SNP government, meanwhile, is going to have to mitigate winter fuel payments for pensioners, which has put Anas Sarwar. I've already been told off by Martin for saying the leader of the Scottish Labour Party. I totally take that point on board, Martin. Thank you for that. But it does leave Sarwar in an awkward position, and Jackie Baillie as well.
Oh yeah, because she's the deputy, I think, in the Scottish Parliament, or deputy of Scottish Labour, I think. So yeah. The two of them. Yeah, do you know, I think I've said it before on here, the thing that really annoys me more than anything else in politics is hypocrisy. I hated it with the Tories, who were full of it for many, many years. It's one of the reasons that I became political in the first place. Now we're seeing it with Labour, UK Labour, and along with their Scottish branch office to keep Martin happy. It's the hypocrisy of it, the standing up, moralising about an issue, and then the minute you're in power, rolling back on it and desperately casting around for some way to pass on blame. And that's what Sarwar and Baillie have been doing consistently since Labour took power in July. Looking for any little thing that they can hook onto to say, oh, it's all the Scottish Government's fault, nothing to do with us. They tried to do that with the winter fuel allowance. And in fact, was it Kendall, one of the MPs in Westminster this week, tried to say that the Scottish Government could make something right when it was very, very clear.
It was Liz Kendall.
Was it Liz Kendall? It was very, very clear under the Scotland Act that the Scottish Government, Scottish Parliament couldn't do anything about it because pensions is entirely reserved. I didn't see Anas Sarwar or Jackie Baillie saying, well, actually our Parliament can't do that. So no, they just shut up, they bite their lip because the hypocrisy is rampant. But all they're looking to is getting into power in 2026. And they can kid themselves on, Brian, that once they get into power in Holyrood, they can make a difference with UK Labour. No, they can't. They're kidding themselves on if they really think that UK Labour will listen to Scottish Labour. They won't. They don't have to. They have that majority. And they have done nothing to suggest that they have any respect at all, either for their colleagues in the Scottish Parliament or for the Scottish Parliament in general.
And just before we leave this topic, if we're talking about energy prices and its effect on pensioner poverty, is it worth maybe mentioning something about, forgive me because I get them mixed up, UK Energy, or is it GB Energy that's going to be headquartered in Aberdeen?
Again, I think there has been a degree of, more than a degree, there's been huge exaggeration about what this will actually mean, because the latest reports I saw, it's going to be an office that a few folk will work from. And we don't know what will actually be done by them, what will happen with them. Now, again, Sarwar and Bailey were up screaming about how wonderful this was going to be, how Scotland was being respected, Scotland was getting huge benefits from a Labour government. I haven't seen them mention it since, unless it's been dragged out of them. So watch this space.
And then there's the national grid, just touch on that. The fact that we're told that Scotland has the energy but it doesn't have the power. We're bursting with renewable energy. We have to turn the turbines off. And yet it costs more.
Yeah, and there we are, just going to be giving it away, more or less. And again, you don't see the mainstream press reporting on these elements either. You keep seeing these reports, and because the constituency I used to represent had part of the Whiteleys wind farm in it, I used to get constituency queries all the time about turbines being turned off because the popular press were having front pages. Oh, what a waste of money, these turbines are rubbish.
How much it costs.
Half a story.
Yeah.
And people read that and they never get the chance of finding out what's really happening unless they take the initiative to write to someone like me. But then again, see if they write to a unionist MP or MSP. They'll get fine words and half a story again, because it seems to be that truth has been a major casualty of election battles over the last few years.
Just before we move on, I mean, it might sound like we're moving away from pension or poverty to do with energy prices, but actually this is, all of these things are going to affect how much money pensioners have to stump up when they come to heat their homes.
I consider myself, I'm a pensioner, but I consider myself really, really fortunate because I have a good pension, works pension as well as my state pension. And people say to me, oh, but Linda, you worked really hard. Yeah, I did work really hard, but do you know what? There's thousands of people that work really hard all their lives and get sod all at the end of it because they've not been fortunate enough to be in a job that gives a good private pension. Ending up in pension or poverty is nothing to do with having worked hard or otherwise. And there's far too many people who are seriously, seriously concerned not knowing whether to turn on their heating or get some decent food out of the supermarket.
Which brings us neatly on to WASPy women. So I'm just thinking, is it maybe worthwhile just asking who is a WASPy woman? You could probably... it stands for...
Women Against State Pension...
See, I've got
Women
a bad memory.
Against State Pension... something.
Yeah.
Inequalities.
Inequalities, yeah. And recently there was £1.8 billion compensation for victims of the Post Office Horizon scandal, but apparently there's nothing for WASPy women.
I don't know if we can compare these things, Brian, to be honest. I mean, the issue about WASPy women is one of women that were born in the 50s were affected when they changed the pension age from 60 to 65. In equality terms, to rationalise the state pension agency for men and women. The issue is one of maladministration because they didn't inform women properly. They should have written it. I mean, I certainly didn't get a letter about it. I learned about it through the press and stuff. And the Ombudsman recently looked at it and said there had in fact been maladministration and the majority of people hadn't had letters. And that therefore there were those who were hugely disadvantaged by it because they hadn't recognised it was happening and perhaps retired too early and ended up with no money and all sorts of different issues in there. Now, I was really quite shocked because when the Ombudsman came out with the ruling, he said that there should be compensation given. And it was a sliding scale. I think it started at £1,000 and went up to 2.5 or something. The level of people having been affected. And I absolutely thought that the Labour government would come up with something, even if it was a compromise. Maybe have made it means tested, which they seem to like these days rather than universality. Or a flat payment across the board. I thought they would come up with something. Because even I was unprepared for the level of hypocrisy that was announced last week when they said there would be nothing. Because the evidence is there to see. I remember standing with Labour MSPs in support of WASPy women. I have seen the posters of Liz Kendall, Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer and all the rest of them standing posing for election photos with WASPy
Jackie
women.
Bailey, Anna Sarwar.
All of them. It was in their manifesto. And now they've just turned around and said, no, we're not doing it after all. Yet another manifesto breach. And Martin said earlier about it all being about political choices. And they have made the choice to pander to those who don't believe in universality, who don't believe in people getting something for nothing as they see it. They have made that choice. I think this one might come back and bite them. Because what it reminds me of very, very much are the Lib Dems standing with posters talking about no tuition fees, etc. in education. And they paid dearly for that. I think Labour might pay dearly for this particular one. And just to finish on the issue of universality, I believe in universality, both in terms of the stigma that can attach to things that you have to apply for. And I notice actually that people have had to apply for their winter fuel payment up until midnight last night, I think it was.
Yeah, I think you have to apply for additional pension benefits.
There's always been low take-up of people in poverty. But they're allowing this to happen. They have the data. They could have sent it out to everybody that was there. But I believe in universality. And in the case of the WASPy women, you know, even the ones that folk may say wouldn't have deserved the £1,000 flat payment or whatever, these people paid taxes all their life. What the heck? And for those who are above earning thresholds for the winter fuel payment and everything else, they're still paying tax. So the issue against universality just doesn't stack up at all. And I'll just end by saying I am disgusted by the Labour Party in power with what they are doing to those that need the most help.
Yeah, there was a piece in the National today that I read which said that Labour MSPs in Holyrood are not looking forward to the 2026 elections.
Well, neither
now.
should they.
And it's maybe just worth saying that the reason that decision was made to change pension payments for women over a certain age, we've got an ageing population, we're all living longer, and Brexit means there's no longer enough young people paying taxes to pay for my upcoming pension payments because there is no pension pot. Yeah. Everybody thinks there's a pension pot, and is that just where we should draw?
Well, you know, there are huge issues about Brexit, and one of them is the lack of freedom of movement. And we talk about it a lot in terms of the disadvantages that are now there for ourselves, and particularly for our young people, in educational opportunities, life opportunities, but it works the other way as well. We do have issues about skill shortages. We do have issues about not enough people to run our public services. And yes, that does have a knock-on effect for people of my age group, your age group, and those coming to these age groups. I actually don't have a huge issue with the pension age being raised, although I think there are particular professions that with the best will in the world you can't expect folk to work till they're 70. But the way they've gone about it has just been awful. The Ombudsman said that in terms of the WASPy women, having their pension age changed from 60 to 65 initially. You have to do things properly. You have to be fair. You have to be transparent. And sadly, we have had years and years and years of a Westminster government that just is not fair or transparent, regardless of what party's in power. And Scotland doesn't have the power to change that unless it becomes an independent country in charge of those who are running it. We can't make any real difference.
And maybe just finish up by saying that, yes, this is a review of 2024. Brexit happened in 2016, but the thing is, it's still going.
Ongoing.
It's not over. It
And
should be
that'll carry
included.
on.
Yeah, it should be included in every annual review, probably for years to come.
Yeah.
So Martin has left us. He had a better offer.
Martin Docherty has left the building.
I don't think it's fair to Martin Docherty-Hughes. Apologies for misnaming you there. I don't think it's fair to put all the pressure on you now to answer all the questions. And I'm thinking maybe at this time of year we should let the viewers get on with their Christmas and yourself too, Linda. So thank you.
Thank you
For coming in and for sharing your thoughts. But before we go, we just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We set our current fundraising target in April and we hoped to reach £36,000 by the end of the year. We're in December now and we're doing the annual review 2024 and we've raised over £19,600, just half of our target. However, to pay our bills and to survive, we urgently need to raise at least another £12,000. We've borrowed £12,000 to enable us to survive for now, but the pressure is still on and we still need to find enough regular donors to give us financial security. Our costs come in at about £4,000 every month, and we get donations of around £2,500, for which we're incredibly grateful. But we need more regular subscribers, and we need to clear our debts as well. We're at crisis point and we need to increase donations to be able to pay the bills and survive. You know that our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or please just donate whatever you can afford. But otherwise, thank you to Linda, thank you to Martin Docherty-Hughes, and thank you to you at home for watching, and we'll be seeing you, no doubt, with more full Scottish reviews of 2024. Bye.